And at first, when I tried to tell them, and the government kept on saying, the deaf need to be normalized and integrated and mainstream. They shouldn't have their own facility. We're going to do them a favor by putting them in an environment or an institution where they can't talk to anybody and can't understand anybody. I said, only you would suggest that. You have to be really stupid to believe that that's where the deaf belong. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Bob Rumball always knew his calling was in the ministry.
We cannot improve.
He didn't know he would find a lifelong bond as an advocate for the deaf.
When I came to the Church of the Deaf, I found 64 people in mental hospitals who didn't belong there, and I found 24 people in jails who didn't belong there. And when I heard the stories and stuff, I was very concerned that we lived in that kind of a country. Often when I am preaching at funeral services, I make mention of the promises and the certainty of God.
Reverend Rumball has broken the barriers faced by the deaf for decades in areas of education, employment, psychiatric care, and the justice system.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Robert Leslie Rumball was born in 1929 in Woodbridge, Ontario. His father, Charles Leslie, a Methodist preacher, and his mother, Bertha Adele, embedded their religious beliefs in Bob and his sisters.
My mother was the one who set the pattern in the home and certainly in my spiritual development. And I grew up being a mummy's boy and never willing to do anything that would hurt her. And all my buddies says, oh, there's the mummy's boy. And after I picked them up, I said, you can say that what you want, but I want you to know I'm a mummy's boy that can handle you any time of the day, any hour of the day.
When in his teens, Bob and his family moved to York Township in the 1940s, a rough and tumble suburb of Toronto.
6 out of the 10 kids that I grew up with were dead by the time they were 24 because of fights and shootings and things of that nature. And yet, every time they got into trouble, they'd say, call the Reverend. I was a kid.
Despite being small, Rumball developed a love for sports while a student at Vaughan Road Collegiate.
I used to have to stand in the front row with the little girls because that's how big I was. And yet by the time I finished high school, I was 5'9", almost 5'10", but I still only weighed 120.
After high school, Bob Rumball attended the University of Toronto. Then weighing close to 200 pounds, he made both the U of T varsity basketball and football teams. Along with sports, he also developed an affection for motorcycles and married Jean Kennedy, a teenaged girl who attended Weston Collegiate.
I found out where the women came out of school, and I stopped her and I said, do you want to go for a ride? And she says, no. I said, are you sure? She says, no, I won't go for a ride without telling my mother. And so I said, well, I'll go and tell your mother. And I went and talked to her mother, and her mother says, nice girls don't ride on motorcycles. I said, they do if they ride with me.
My mother was concerned about me riding around on a bike. My grandma loved him because he was going to be a minister, she thought. And so that was good. I think it was the bike that concerned them the most, and that he was older, only 4 years, but at that time was quite 18 to 22 was a little bit of a difference.
Bob Rumball graduated from the University of Toronto with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1952. By this time, he had developed into an outstanding football player who attracted the attention of numerous Canadian Football League teams. He was also beginning to consider making religion a career.
When I finished my university training, I got invitations from the Eskimos and from Ottawa, and I said to Ottawa, as long as you don't ask me to play on Sunday. And they used to play in Montreal on Sunday. And every time we lost in Montreal, I would see articles in the newspaper, Rumball in pulpit, Rough Riders get whipped in Montreal.
Embarking on theological training while still playing professional football was hard to schedule in Canada, so Bob Rumball enrolled at Northern Baptist Seminary in Chicago. The courses at that school were offered during the football off-season. Despite the distance, he stayed in contact with Mary Jean.
Came back and I said, well, when are we getting married? She said, I don't remember agreeing to get married. Well, I said, well, you better make up your mind pretty soon because I need a wife.
I didn't really want him to be a minister. In growing up, my family had been very close always to the ministers in our church, and I knew the problems they had because they were always coming over to our house, and I didn't want that. But, whatever happens, happens.
Bob Rumball and Mary Jean Kennedy married on December 30th, 1955. After 4 seasons with the Ottawa Rough Riders, Rumball was traded to the Toronto Argonauts in 1956. That year, in a church on Wellesley Street, Bob Rumball found his life's calling.
When I was with the Toronto Argonauts, I was invited to speak at the Church of the Deaf, and it was a new experience for me because, number one, there was an interpreter beside me, and nobody looked at me, they all looked at the interpreter. And I keep on looking to see what the interpreter was doing. And then they said, they're desperate, they'll take anybody. Would you come and be the pastor here? And I said, as soon as the football season's over, I'll come here. And it was February, and I went off until I saw a farm on lake for sale. I didn't know that the last walk was 1.5 miles in snow up to my crotch, and I wasn't really dressed for it, but I walked in, and I met the folk, and I said, I want to buy your property. And they said, you want to buy it? Yeah. They said, do you know how much we're asking for it? And I said, no. Tell me what you're asking for it. And they told me. I said, I want to buy it.
That walk was the start of a camp that now houses year-round programs for the deaf. At the same time, when his commitment to the deaf was growing, so was his family. In 1972, the Rumballs moved to Caledon, a small village northwest of Toronto. By the late 70s, they had 5 children, had adopted a Korean deaf child, and were foster parents to another. All the children grew up working and attending camp and became used to an open house policy.
Growing up in this environment, I just assumed that all the hectic and madness around me was normal, and that's the way everybody lived.
I think our children did suffer a little bit because of it, because if anybody came to the door, the police or anything needing interpreting for some deaf person, you couldn't just say, wait a minute. You had to go down to the door and answer it. And when Rob was out somewhere else, then I had to do this with a baby in my arms, others pulling at my legs, but I would still have to take the children down to the office and deal with whatever was going on down there.
She never knew who my dad was bringing home, and my dad would bring home some pretty interesting people who today I wouldn't let in my home.
I didn't really think too much about it. I think I just accepted what came and dealt with it. And I think my nurse's training helped in that way a lot. It helped me be organized and to handle emergencies and just do what needed to be done.
My dad has had his series of challenges here. I mean, I don't fully claim to understand the kind of hardships that he would have gone through trying to do what he's done back in the early 60s and 70s because of the different climate now. But I know that there's no way he would have survived it without my mom.
Bob Rumball felt that the deaf needed a more permanent solution in Toronto, far beyond the confines of the church on Wellesley Street. In 1975, while heading north on Bayview Avenue, just north of Lawrence Avenue, Rumball saw a 6-acre estate owned by General Bruce Matthews. He felt it would be a perfect home for a centre for the deaf. Though the property was not for sale, Rumball knocked on the door and made General Matthews an offer.
He says, well, it's not for sale, you know. I said, no, but you'll want to sell it and I'll want to buy it. And I'm going to give you an offer, an open offer. And it's good for as long as you and I live. And one day he called me, he says, you still want that property? I said, yes. And he says, can you get the money today? And I said, how much money are you talking about? And he had upped the price. I had offered him $700,000. He upped it to $900,000. And I said, okay, I'll take it. And I went and borrowed the $900,000 that day. I couldn't borrow 10 cents from the bank today, but I walked in, signed my name, got $900,000 and went over and gave it to him at number 10 Toronto Street where his office was. And he said, I didn't think you could do it. I said, well, when you called me, I didn't know whether I could do it. But here it is.
His friend and Caledon neighbour, Con Smythe, founder of the Toronto Maple Leafs Hockey Club, would be instrumental in the development of the centre. Smythe wanted to be part of this project, and he had the connections to help make it happen. The centre would offer a recreational, social, and spiritual retreat for the deaf.
Smythe used to come and say, who are we going to see today? And he'd pick me up with his chauffeur, and we'd go place, and I would have no idea where we're going. And he said, I want you to tell these fellas what you're doing and why you're doing it and why you need the help. And he'd put the arm on them. And many of them contributed.
Connie was able to approach people better than Rob in asking for money. Rob still, I don't think he enjoys asking for money. Connie would walk right in there and just do it.
Contributions came from a variety of powerful men in the worlds of business and sports. The owner of the Maple Leafs at the time, Harold Ballard, and wrestler whipper Billy Watson also jumped on the Rumball Smythe bandwagon.
Ballard would say, is there anything I can do for you? And I would tell him. I remember once I said to him, there's a group of Canadians that would like to put on a fundraising event. We'll do it for the deaf in the garden. And he said, and who's involved? And I told him, he said, it won't work. He said, I'll tell you what, it'll cost me $25,000 to open the garden to allow somebody to come in. I'll give you the $25,000, but I don't want you doing that because you will not win, that kind of a thing. And he was the smartest business operator that I knew, and whenever I had a business decision, I'd go and ask him. And he always told me. Always told me. And I never found him to be wrong.
The centre today provides a long list of programs, including a preschool, housing, adult education programs, and palliative care. The centre has a full-time staff of 75 people, all proficient in sign language. To the end of his life, Con Smythe remained a friend and visitor to the centre.
Mr. Smythe, who paid for this chapel, he would come in and he would read that Bible, and then he would say, is this true, Bobby? And I said, absolutely. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be in the ministry.
I will define that. He is a godly inspired stubbornness. If he gets something in his head that he feels that he will walk obediently and it is in the best interest of the folk around him, there is nothing, no legislative body, no politician, no bureaucratic person that will convince him otherwise. I'm afraid I have a little bit of that myself. So,
Reverend Rumball has passed many values on to his children, including welcoming those in need into their homes. Son Derek took an abandoned deaf girl into his.
And when there was a young lady who was left behind in Barrie, and her parents left Ontario and went out to BC, they left her behind, and she just went to his house and lived with him, and he raised her. And she's a great little girl, and she has a college degree today.
Apart from a generosity of spirit, the Rumball family shares another passion.
First you make sure it's in neutral, and then
if we don't smell like gas and oil, there's something wrong at the end of the day. So I think it's just something if there's one of those family traits that gets passed down, and this is probably true of all my brothers and sisters, their kids, is there is always a gas can, and there's probably always a motorcycle or an ATV or a bike or something in the garage that's just waiting to be rode. And I'm sure if my dad's body cooperated more, he'd be out riding even today.
Hip replacement has put an end to Bob Rumball's motorcycle riding.
It was a difficult thing for me to accept helmets and things of that nature. Although I find out now that I should have, because I got skin cancer up here from wind and sun of riding around for so many years on a motorcycle without a hat.
Beyond the camp in Parry Sound and the centre on Bayview Avenue, Bob Rumble has left a lasting impression for the deaf community on a national level as well. In the early 1980s, he brought his concerns to the Prime Minister of the day, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was formulating a Canadian Charter of Rights.
Several times I said to him, you know, if somebody somewhere would just stand up and be honest about the needs of the deaf. And then he phoned me and says, now what would you like? And I told him. And then the justices that they appointed to draft up they used to phone me. And like a jerk, every time I gave an illustration, it was always somebody in jail. So in the early days, it was only deaf criminals that had rights. But now, according to the Charter of Rights and Freedom and Mr. Trudeau, every deaf person has rights to understand and be understood. And that if you can't give a caution to them, you better get an interpreter.
Over the years, Bob Rumble has played that role numerous times, helping interpret for deaf accused in court.
I'm there just to see that justice is done. And if there's injustice because of the ignorance of the police officer, I put a stop to it. I remember once they brought in evidence to show that they had already given him his caution and everything else, and he's standing in a police station with his hands on the counter facing that direction. The police are back here reading him the caution. I said, I hate to tell you this, he doesn't read out of the back of his head.
And yet another dichotomy of Rumble's personality, he also acts as chaplain for the Metro Toronto Police Service. He performs everything from spiritual counseling to weddings to funerals.
It was something a little different, and it was good, I think, particularly for Rob, to get him, to give him something else just besides focusing on the deaf all the time, because our life has really been quite abnormal. We don't socialize with hearing people a lot. Most of our friends are the deaf. They are our life, so the police work has been very good for him. And I enjoy it too when I can get out to these different dinners and special events. It's good.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from
Reverend Rumble officially retired as the center's executive director in 1992.
Amen.
Along with running the camp in Parry Sound, his son Derek now holds that post. Most days, Bob Rumble makes the commute in from his home in Barrie to help out at the center. He also still preaches on occasion in its chapel.
I want forgiveness without any repentance. Can't do it.
I guess what's next is whatever needs to be next. Because the needs of our deaf community and of our special needs community will continue to change, and we will have to change with them. We are not a political body, and we are not going to get wrapped up in what the right thing of the day is. We're going to get wrapped up in what the right thing is for people in need.
Reverend Rumble's latest vision is a retirement home for the deaf, built on the shores of Lake Simcoe, near his home.
At first, I came to the deaf church because Reverend Etheridge was going to Jamaica to start a school for the deaf there, where they had no deaf church and no school. And I came, and I learned, and I listened, and I read about the history, and I read about the individuals, and I saw the people who were faithful and obedient to God's command. And it was a great privilege. When I ride the public transport back here to the center, and I'm on the bus, and I hear the lady say, "When did he die?" And I said, you know, There are some people's names that are on buildings and stuff before they die. Oh. They said, how would you know? I said, I'm Bob Rumball. And my name probably doesn't belong there. But people don't give to causes as much as they give to people. So that when Smythe decided to build the chapel and Ballard decided to build the cafeteria, and King Clancy would come up and thrill the people up here, those kind of things were, I would say, because they were my friends. And it's been a great journey and a great trip.